Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Seth and Patrick are two nerds in a basement who sit and they talk about the Wheel of Time. They are doing a deep dive, chapter by chapter, going through the book, talking about all of the things that, you know, all the foreshadowing that we see early, all of the theories, all of the everything. We originally started with, there were only 13 of us, so we call ourselves the Chosen or the Forsaken. I am Aganor on our little Discord, and we all have our own little bits. I'm also the head of the Black Aja, because Black Aja. And we're just a bunch of nerds who love the Wheel of Time, and last year we decided to hang out with them at a bar for 2 days, and then we decided to do a huge event with 50 people and all sorts of things. We have a Wheel of Time themed Age of Legends D&D game we're going to be doing here in a couple of hours, run by me and one of my other friends over here. What else have we done? We had a live recording of the show where we talked about land fear. We had a silent auction for the charity that you guys requested. We raised $2,054.
So it went up to $2,100 even.
Oh, 20. Okay, so we got another donation. So yeah, $2,100 total. There was a lot of cool Wheel of Time stuff. This group is a little obsessed. So we're having a costume contest later. We're having a pub trivia contest later. We're just a bunch of Wheel of Time nerds who wanted to hang out together and nerd out about our favorite 4.4 million word book series. And then, you know, I am sort of the guy that likes surprises, so I tried to come up with a surprise, and I was like, you know what are the odds that the narrators of said audiobook would be willing to sit and chat with us? And now we're here. So, you guys wanted.
Is there any way you can take your camera and just pan the room so we can see everything?
I got the ceiling.
Aim
There
down.
you go.
There we go. Woo! Oh, you look beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. I think I should go first because it's always best to lead with the appetizer and then deliver the entree. So this is Maureen's wonderful speech in Emmonsfield. You'll forgive me, it's been almost 30 years. A scowl grew on Bran's face, but before he could speak, Maureen suddenly whirled her vine-carved staff above her head, spinning it with both hands. Brand's gasp echoed that of the villagers, for a hissing white flame flared from each end of the staff, standing straight out like spear points despite the rods whirling. Even Bran and Haral edged away from her. She snapped her arms down straight out before her, the staff parallel to the ground, but the pale fire still jetted out, brighter than the torches. Men shied away, held up hands to shield their eyes from the pain of that brilliance. Is this what Aemon's blood has come to? The Aes Sedai's voice was not loud, but it overwhelmed every other sound. Little people, squabbling for the right to hide like rabbits. You have forgotten who you were, forgotten what you were. But I'd hoped some small part was left, some memory in blood and bone, some shred to steel you for the long night coming. No one spoke. The two Coplans looked as if they never wanted to open their mouths again. Bran said, "Forgotten who we were? We are who we always have been. Honest farmers and shepherds and craftsmen. Two Rivers folk. To the south, Moiraine said, lies the river you call the White River. But far to the east of here, men call it still by its rightful name. Manetheren, in the old tongue, waters of the mountain home. Sparkling waters that once coursed through a land of bravery and beauty. 2,000 years ago, Manetheren flowed by the walls of a mountain city, so lovely to behold that Ogier stonemasons came to stare in wonder. Farms and villages covered this region, and that you call the Forest of Shadows as well, and beyond. But all of those folk thought of themselves as the people of the mountain home, the people of Manetheren. Their king was Aemon Alcar Althorin, Aemon, son of Car, son of Thorin, and Eldrain Elan Carlan was his queen. Aemon, a man so fearless that the greatest compliment for courage any could give, even among his enemies, was to say a man had Aemon's heart. Eldrain, so beautiful that it was said the flowers bloomed to make her smile. Bravery and beauty and wisdom and a love that death could not sunder. Weep, if you have a heart, for the loss of them, for the loss of even their memory. Weep for the loss of their blood. She fell silent then, but no one spoke. Rand was as bound as the others in the spell she had created. When she spoke again, he drank it in, and so did the rest. For nearly 2 centuries, the Trolloc Wars had ravaged the length and breadth of the world, and wherever battles raged, the Red Eagle banner of Manetheren was in the forefront. The men of Manetheren were a thorn to the Dark One's foot and a bramble to his hand. Sing of Manetheren that would never bend knee to the shadow. Sing of Manetheren, the sword that could not be broken. They were far away, the men of Manetheren, on the field of Bekar, called the Field of Blood, when news came that a Trolloc army was moving against their home. Too far to do else but wait to hear of their land's death. For the forces of the Dark One meant to make an end of them, kill the mighty oak by hacking away its roots. Too far to do else but mourn, but they were the men of the mountain home. Without hesitation, without thought for the distance they must travel, they marched from the very field of victory, still covered in dust and sweat and blood. Day and night they marched, for they had seen the horror a Trolloc army left behind it, and no man of them could sleep while such a danger threatened Manetheren. They moved as if their feet had wings, marching further and faster than friends hoped or enemies feared they could. At any other day, that march alone would have inspired songs. When the Dark One's armies swooped down upon the lands of Manetheren, the men of the mountain home stood before it, with their backs to the Tarandrel. Some villager raised a small cheer then, but Moiraine kept on as if she had not heard. The host that faced the men of Manetheren was enough to daunt the bravest heart. Ravens blackened the sky. Trollocs blackened the land. Trollocs and their human allies. Trollocs and dark friends in tens of thousands, and dreadlords to command. At night their cook fires outnumbered the stars, and dawn revealed the banner of Baalzamon at their head. Baalzamon, heart of the dark, an ancient name for the father of lies. The Dark One could not have been free of his prison at Sheol Ghul, for if he had been, not all the forces of humankind together could have stood against him, but there was power there. Dreadlords, and some evil that made that light-destroying banner seem no more than right, and sent a chill into the souls of the men who faced it. Yet they knew what they must do. Their homeland lay just across the river. They must keep that host and the power with it from the mountain home. Aemon had sent out messengers. Aid was promised. If they could hold for but 3 days at the Tarandrel, hold for 3 days against odds that should overwhelm them in the first hour, yet somehow, through bloody assault and desperate defense, they held through an hour, and the second hour, and the third. For 3 days they fought, and though the land became a butcher's yard, no crossing of the Tarandrel did they yield. By the third night, no help had come, and no messengers, and they fought on alone. For 6 days, for 9. And on the 10th day, Aemon knew the bitter taste of betrayal. No help was coming, and they could hold the river crossings no more. What did they do? Hari demanded. Torch fires flickered in the chill night breeze, but no one made a move to draw a cloak tighter. Aemon crossed the Tarandrel, Moiraine told them, destroying the bridges behind him. And he sent word throughout his land for the people to flee, for he knew the powers with the Troll Accord would find a way to bring it across the river. Even as the word went out, the Trolloc crossing began, and the soldiers of Manetheren took up the fight again, to buy with their lives what hours they could for their people to escape. From the city of Manetheren, Eldraine organized the flight of her people into the deepest forests and the fastness of the mountains. But some did not flee. First in a trickle, then a river, then a flood, men went not to safety, but to join the army fighting for their land. Shepherds went with bows, and farmers with pitchforks, and woodsmen with axes. Women went too, shouldering what weapons they could find, and marching side by side with their men. No one made that journey who did not know they would never return. But it was their land. It had been their fathers', and it would be their children's, and they went to pay the price of it. Not a step of ground was given up until it was soaked in blood. But at the last, the army of Manetheren was driven back to here, to this place you now call Emond's Field. And here, the Troll Accords surrounded them. Her voice held the sound of cold tears. Trolloc dead, and the corpses of human renegades piled up in mounds, but always more scrambled over those charnel heaps in waves of death that had no end. There could be but one finish. No man or woman who had stood beneath the banner of the Red Eagle at that day's dawning still lived when night fell. The sword that could not be broken was shattered. In the mountains of mist, alone in the emptied city of Manetheren, Eldraine felt Aemon die, and her heart died with him. And where her heart had been was left only a thirst for vengeance. Vengeance for her love, vengeance for her people and her land. Driven by grief, she reached out to the true source and hurled the one power at the Trolloc army. And there the Dreadlords died wherever they stood, whether in their secret councils or exhorting their soldiers. In the passing of a breath, the Dreadlords and the generals of the Dark One's host burst into flame. Fire consumed their bodies, and terror consumed their just victorious army. Now they ran like beasts before a wildfire in the forest, with no thought for anything but escape. North and south they fled. Thousands drowned attempting to cross the Tarandrel without the aid of the Dreadlords. And at the Manetheren Drell they tore down the bridges in their fright at what might be following them. Where they found people they slew and burned, but to flee was the need that gripped them, until at last no one of them remained in the lands of Manetheren. They were dispersed like dust before the whirlwind. The final vengeance came more slowly, but it came when they were hunted down by other peoples, by other armies in other lands. None was left alive of those who did murder at Aemon's Field. But the price was high for Manetheren. Eldraine had drawn to herself more of the one power than any human could ever hope to wield unaided. As the enemy generals died, so did she die, and the fires that consumed her consumed the empty city of Manetheren, even the stones of it, down to the living rock of the mountains. Yet the people had been saved. Nothing was left of their farms, their villages, or their great city. Some would say there was nothing left for them, nothing but to flee to other lands where they could begin anew. They did not say so. They had paid such a price in blood and hope for their land as never had been paid before. And now they were bound to that soil by ties stronger than steel. Other wars would rack them in years to come, until at last their corner of the world was forgotten. And at last they had forgotten wars and the ways of war. Never again did Manetheren rise. Its soaring spires and flat, splashing fountains became as a dream that slowly faded from the minds of its people. But they and their children and their children's children held the land that was theirs. They held it when the long centuries had washed the why of it from their memories. They held it until today. There is you. Weep for Manetheren. Weep for what is lost forever. The fires on Moraine's staff winked out, and she lowered it to her side as if it weighed 100 pounds. For a long moment, the moan of the wind was the only sound.
Oh my god.
I don't know how he's going to beat that.
And it's so wonderful to hear Moraine say that. In the books, it's Rand's POV, and so we never get to hear Moraine do that. And it's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Chapter 47, More Tales of the Wheel. An itchy restlessness had Rand pacing beside the dining table. 12 strides. The table was exactly 12 strides long, no matter how many times he stepped it off. Irritably, he made himself stop, keeping tally. Stupid thing to be doing. I don't care how long the bloody table is. A few minutes later, he discovered that he was counting the number of trips he made up to the table and back. What is he saying to Moraine and Lan? Does he know why the Dark One is after us? Does he know which of us the Dark One wants? He glanced at his friends. Perrin had crumbled a piece of bread and was idly pushing the crumbs around on the table with one finger. His yellow eyes stared unblinking at the crumbs, but they seemed to see something far off. Matt slouched in his chair, eyes half closed, and the beginnings of a grin on his face. It was a nervous grin, not amusement. Outwardly, he looked like the old Matt, but from time to time he unconsciously touched the Shadow Logoth dagger through his coat. What is Thane telling her? What does he know? Loyal, at least, did not look worried. The Ogier was studying the walls. First he had stood in the middle of the room and stared, turning slowly in a circle. Now he was almost pressing his broad nose against the stone while he gently traced a particular join with fingers thicker than most men's thumbs. Sometimes he closed his eyes, as if the feeling was more important than seeing. His ears gave an occasional twitch, and he muttered to himself in Ogier, appearing to have forgotten anyone else was in the room with him. Lord Agelmar stood talking quietly with Nynaeve and Egwene in front of the long fireplace at the end of the room. He was a good host, adept at making people forget their troubles. Several of his stories had Egwene in giggles. Once even Nynaeve threw back her head and roared with laughter. Rand gave a start at the unexpected sound and jumped again when Matt's chair crashed to the floor. Blood and ashes! Ignoring the way Nynaeve's mouth tightened at his language. What's taking her so long? He righted his chair and sat back down without looking at anyone. His hand strayed to his coat. The Lord of Faldara looked at Matt disapprovingly. His gaze took in Rand and Perrin without any improvement, then turned back to the women. Rand's pacing had taken him close to them. My lord, Egwene was saying, as glibly as if she had been using titles all of her life. I thought he was a warder, but you call him Daishan, and talk about a golden crane banner. And so did those other men. Sometimes you sound almost as if he's a king. I remember once Moraine called him the last lord of the Seven Towers. Who is he? Nynaeve began studying her cup intently, but it was obvious to Rand that abruptly she was listening even more closely than was Egwene. Rand stopped and tried to overhear without seeming to eavesdrop. Lord of the Seven Towers, Agelmar said with a frown. An ancient title, Lady Egwene. No, even the High Lords of Tyr have older, though the Queen of Andor comes close. He heaved a sigh and shook his head. He will not speak of it, yet the story is well known along the border. He is a king, or should have been. Alan Mandragoran, Lord of the Seven Towers, Lord of the Lakes, crownless king of the Malkyrie. His shaven head lifted high, and there was a light in his eye, as if he felt a father's pride. His voice grew stronger, filled with the force of his feeling. The whole room could hear without straining. We of Shinar call ourselves bordermen. But fewer than 50 years ago, Shinar was not truly the borderlands. None of us, and of Arafel, was Melkir. North of us, and of Arafel was Melkir. The lances of Shinar rode north, but it was Melkir that held back the blight. Melkir, peace favor her memory and the light to illumine her name. Lan is from Melkir, the wisdom said softly, looking up. She seemed disturbed, troubled. It was not a question, but Agelmar nodded. Yes, Lady Nynaeve. He is the son of Al-Akir Mandragoran, last crowned king of the Malkyrie. How did he become as he is? The beginning, perhaps, was Lane. On a dare, Lane Mandragoran, the king's brother, led his lances through the blight to blasted lands. Perhaps to Shale Ghul itself. I'm hearing something on a microphone somewhere. No? Okay. Something is moving. Okay, never mind. On a dare, Lane Mandragoran, the king's brother, led his lances through the blight to the blasted lands, perhaps to Shale Ghul itself. Lane's wife, Freyan, made that dare. The envy that burned her heart that Al-Akir had been raised to the throne instead of Lane. The king and Lane were as close as brothers could be, as close as twins, even after the royal Al was added to Akir's name, but jealousy racked Lane. Lane was acclaimed for his deeds, and rightfully so, but not he outshine Al-Akir. He was
man and king, such as comes once in 100 years, if that. Peace favor him and Eliana. Lane died in the blasted lands with most of those who followed him. Then Melkir could ill afford to lose, and Brian blamed the king, saying that Shale Ghul itself would have fallen if Al-Akir had led the rest of the Melkiri north with her husband. For revenge, she plotted with Cowan, Gemolin, called Cowan Fairheart, to seize the throne for her son, Isam. Now, Fairheart was a hero almost as beloved as Al-Akir himself, and one of the great lords. But when the great lords had cast the rods for king, only two separated him from Akir. And he never forgot that two men laying different color on the crowning stone would have set him on the throne instead. Between them, Cowan and Brian moved soldiers back from the Blight to seize the Seven Towers, stripping the border ports to bare garrisons. But Cowan's jealousy ran deeper. Disgust tinged Aguilar's voice. Fairheart, the hero, whose exploits in the Blight were sung throughout the borderlands, was a dark friend. With the border forts weakened, Trollocs poured into Melkir like a flood. King Al-Akir and Lane together might have rallied the land. They had done so before. But Lane's doom in the blasted lands had shaken the people, and the Trolloc invasion broke men's spirit and their will to resist. Too many men. Overwhelming numbers pushed the Melkiri back into the heartland. Brian fled with her infant son Isam and was run down by Trollocs as she rode south with him. No one knows their fate to a certainty, but it can be guessed. I can find pity only for the boy. When Cowan Fairheart's treachery was revealed and he was taken by young Jane Charon, already called Jane Farstrider. When Fairheart was brought to the Seven Towers in chains, the great lord called for his head on a pike. But because he had been second only to Al-Akir and Lane in the hearts of the people, the king faced him in single combat and slew him. Al-Akir wept when he killed Cowan. Some say he wept for a friend who had given himself to the shadow. Some say for Melkir. The Lord of Faldara shook his head sadly. The first peal of the doom of the Seven Towers had been struck. There was no time to gather aid from Shinar or Arafel, and no hope that Melkir could stand alone, with 5,000 of her lancers dead in the blasted lands, her border forts overrun. Al-Akir and his queen, Eliana, had land brought to them in his cradle. Into his infant hands, they placed the sword of the Melkiri kings, the sword he wears today, a weapon made by Aes Sedai during the War of Power, the War of the Shadow that brought down the Age of Legends. They anointed his head with oil, naming him Daishan, a diademed battle lord, and consecrated him as the next king of the Melkiri. In his name, they swore the ancient oath of the Melkiri kings and queens. Agelmar's face hardened, and he spoke the words as if he, too, had sworn that oath, or one much similar. To stand against the shadow so long as iron is hard and stone abides. To defend the Melkiri while one drop of blood remains. To avenge what cannot be defended. The words rang in the chamber. Eliana placed a locket around her son's neck for remembrance, and the infant, wrapped in swaddling clothes by the queen's own hand, was given over to 20 chosen from the king's bodyguard, the best swordsmen, the most deadly fighters. Their command? To carry the child to Falmoran. Then did Al-Akir and Eliana lead the Melkiri out to face the shadow one last time. There they died, Herod's Crossing, and the Melkiri died, and the 7 towers were broken. Shinar and Arafel and Kandor met the half-men and the Trollocs at the stair of Jahan and threw them back, not as far as they had been. Most of Malkir remained in Trolloc hands, and year by year, mile by mile, the blight has swallowed it. Agelmar drew a heavy-hearted breath. When he went on, there was a sad pride in his eyes and voice. Only 5 of the bodyguards reached Falmaran alive, every man wounded. But they had the child unharmed. From the cradle, they taught him all they knew. He learned weapons as other children learned toys, and the blight as other children their mother's garden. The oath sworn over his cradle is graven in his mind. There is nothing left to defend, but he can avenge. He denies his titles, yet in the borderlands he is called the Uncrowned. And if ever he raised the golden crane of Melkir, an army would come to follow. But he will not lead men to their deaths. In the blight he courts death as a suitor courts a maiden, but he will not lead others to it. If you must enter the blight, and with only a few, there is no man better to take you there, nor to bring you safely out again. He is the best of the warders, and that means the best of the best. You might as well leave these boys here to gain a little seasoning and put your entire trust in Lan. The blight is no place for untried boys. Matt opened his mouth and shut it again. Nynaeve had listened just as wide-eyed as Egwene, but now she was staring into her cup again, her face pale. Egwene put a hand on her arm and gave her a sympathetic look. Moraine appeared in the doorway, Lan at her heels. Nynaeve turned her back on them. "What did he say?" Rand demanded. Matt rose, and Perrin too. "Country oaf," Agelmar muttered, then raised his voice to a normal tone. "Did you learn anything, Aes Sedai, or is he simply a madman?" "He is mad," Moraine said, "or close to it. But there is nothing simple about Padon Fane." One of the black and gold liveried servants bowed his way in with a blue wash basin and pitcher, a bar of yellow soap, and a small towel on a silver tray. He looked anxiously at Agelmar. Moraine directed him to put them on the table. "Your pardon for commanding your servants, Lord Agelmar," she said. "I took the liberty of asking for this." Agelmar nodded to the servant, who put the tray on the table and left hurriedly. My servants are yours to command, Aes Sedai."
Okay, everybody settled? Okay. So if we're all set for questions, then I think I'm going to have everybody start lining up and start asking questions, if that's all right.
Sure, it's fine.
Okay, anyone who wants to ask a question, go ahead and line up.
Oh, do I get to go first?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Good God.
There's the camera.
Hi.
You stand up. I will move the camera to you.
First of all, hi, fangirl. I have a question. Oh, how did you guys decide to go into doing audiobooks in the first place?
It beats waiting tables. we have a friend, Grover Gardner, who works with Blackstone Audio. And many, many years ago, decades, we all worked in theater together here in DC. And Grover at that time was working for the Library of Congress Talking Books program, which is a brilliant program. Millions of free audiobooks for anyone who is unable to read a print book. It is the best kept secret of government programs. Almost no one knows about it. And Michael and I have both recorded for it for decades. And it's an amazing program. So anyway, Grover suggested to me that I start working at the studio. And that fairly quickly led to his sending a demo to some commercial companies. And that's how I started working. And then Michael had a slightly different path.
Yeah, it was through Grover as well. When we first began recording books, the industry, we recorded on reel-to-reel machines. And you needed to have an engineer or a monitor as you were narrating to run the machine and back up and do all the corrections, and also to help stop you if you made a mistake and say you missed a word or whatever. And so Grover was working, my affiliation began with a different studio, and he needed a monitor, and I came down and monitored him, and there were 3 or 4 other narrators there. And so over the course of 3 years or so, I began being all 3 other monitors, or narrators, engineer as well. And we knew each other because we were actors. And then the head of the studio saw me in a play, and she said, "You need to be narrating." So she had me a demo out, and I sent it to 2 different companies. And it's kind of this history from there. The acting has always kind of complemented the narration work. It's very much the same. It's storytelling, it's voice work, it's all of that. The accents I've worked on as a narrator, and then the accents I've worked on as a stage actor have kind of complemented all of that. It's a great, it's a great way of working on your craft on a daily basis. And I found that I really love to tell stories that other people have written.
When we first started out working for commercial companies, we would go over to Grover's house. He lives quite close by. And we would go over to his house, and he had put 3 booths in his house. So he had a booth in a back bedroom, a booth in a middle bedroom, and a booth in the basement. And we would record in one of those booths because he had, the equipment and stuff. And we had to work with an engineer because we were working with ADAT tape.
DAT first.
DAT first and then ADAT,
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know, ADAT recording machines use VHS tape that you format into 8 tracks. And you go over the tape again and again and again and again to record your 8 tracks. And if you're 2 minutes from the end of the very last track on the tape, and the machine eats your tape, no backup, no, start at the top and read.
Yeah.
And then eventually we moved to a different house that had a basement that had space for a booth. So we put a booth in the house we live in now and started recording. I need to ask, are there 2 microphones on? Because we are hearing like echo noises, and I'm wondering if there's something here.
Yes, there are 2 mics.
Yeah, it's handled. Yeah, I mean, if you can kind of imagine a time when there was no internet.
They can't.
Okay.
When way too young.
Okay. When your phone had to be connected by a wire to somewhere. Long distance was hugely expensive. CDs had not been invented yet. Thing as a cell phone, it was a car phone, and it was about the size of. It looked like that, and you would plug it into
They can't see your head.
It was about. I can still remember sitting in the ballpark. Somebody was thrilled that they could take their charged car phone out of their car, sit in the ballpark, and say, "Guess where I'm calling from?" Baseball stadium. So technology has changed a whole lot. I mean, it used to be we would make a master, then we would have to put the master onto cassettes, ship all of that physically out in the two companies we mainly worked for in the beginning, where one was in Oregon and one was in California. And then they would duplicate everything. And then if you wanted to order, you would, either you had to mail in an order, you might be able to call in an order. They would have to then package it and ship it to you. It would take 3 to 5 days to get to you. And God forbid that your car cassette player would chew up a cassette, because then you were stuck and I can't, nothing. And you were limited in terms of, I think, because the boxes that held the cassettes could only go up to 20. So, and each cassette was only
45 minutes each
45 minutes a side. So once you got to 20, what is that? Once you got to 30 hours, you needed to have a part 2. So,
it all sounds so archaic.
Yeah.
When we started out, so I think we started pretty much in the late 80s.
Yeah.
It was a side gig. I had waited tables for a decade, and it was a gradual, am I earning enough from doing audiobooks to be able to quit my restaurant job? And then we were both doing a lot of theater as well. And so it was a really gradual transition. What would you say was the first year we made most of our income from audiobooks?
Probably around
10 years ago or so?
No, it was longer than
15.
It was long, about 15, right around 2000.
And the booth in our basement, and we had 2 kids, right? So the booth in our basement was a homemade booth. We actually, we had a contractor who was doing some renovations on the house when we bought it. And we said, we need you to build a box in the basement. And none of the walls can be parallel. Can you do that? He said, yeah, I'll just give the workers a bottle of Jack and tell them to build a box. When we were recording in that booth, the kids could not move anywhere around the house. Even if the stairs behind us that lead up to the next floor, they couldn't even walk up those stairs. And one of our kids, Henry Kramer, who's actually getting into audiobooks himself, his nickname was Little Stomping Buffalo. So we had trained our kids to be like, I'm recording!
I think also one of the reasons...
It scarred them.
Yeah. One of the reasons we, I think, were initially assigned this series was because we were in the same studio, and because at that point you couldn't physically, like in a computer, you can create a WAV file, email it to somebody, they can paste it in. It was all being done in linear, on tape, and they weren't splicing it. So they needed somebody who could go back and forth. And so oftentimes, especially in the later books, where 2 pages, it's me, 3 pages, it's her, 1 page, it's me, 5 pages, it's her, 10, we would literally be standing outside of the booth as the other one, hurry up. And because that was the only way we could get the thing together.
Yeah. And then we did another renovation and created a real studio. So we have a room in the basement. We dug down about 18 inches to get a high enough ceiling for we have vocal booths, which is like a whisper room, but it's like a booth that arrives and you assemble it. and there's one for him and one for me. And that's our current setup, so we're very happy with that.
Next question.
Which one am I asking?
Just ask.
Just there? Okay,
Yeah.
sweet. That answered a lot of my questions. Yeah, I guess with the technology change from when you guys recorded Eye of the World to, say, Oathbringer, how much quicker is it to record an audiobook now versus then? And how much easier? A lot.
No, I mean, the process is usually whatever the length of the book is, it will take you between 2 and 3 times that length of the work done in the booth to come up with that, the finished recording. But everything about the production of it, like if you're on tape and you somehow miss a paragraph and you don't realize that until the end of the chapter, you have to go back and you have to re-record and you have to speed everything up to fit that paragraph in or redo everything from that mistake. Now, you miss a paragraph, you just insert space, record the paragraph, done. So in that sense, it really is like going from horse and buggy to rocket fuel.
I mean, and it's more on the production side, not on our side that it's speeded up, because whereas before you would create the track, then you would have to duplicate it onto a cassette and then ship that. So you're talking a day or 2 days to ship it. Then they would have to process everything.
And
now,
it's really expensive to
click,
produce
click, and they have 90 minutes, however much material you want to send. They have that in their hands. Just like you can get on your phone and go, oh, I'm listening to a sample chat. That sounds interesting. Click, 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 bang, and it's there.
Yeah.
So that's what's sped up. What has also changed when the industry started, because it was so new and it was like, are people really going to do this? I would literally have a shelf, and they would send companies would send you a box full of books, print books that had already, that had been out there, and say, okay, we want this one first, then that one, then that one. If it was a new book, a new book would come into audio 3 to 6 months after it was actually published. And then the transition became, no, we want to release the book at the same time that the print book comes out. So then we started getting galleys, like the second pass, say, that an author had that hadn't been corrected necessarily. And you would get these literally stacks of paper. At the end of each year, we had a 4-drawer file, and there would be a stack of paper as tall as that file from all the galleys that we would get. And that's when the industry started to change a whole lot in terms of, because the publisher wasn't getting the print edition until weeks before they were going to publish, all of a sudden, instead of having months to do a book, they needed it in 10 days, they needed it in 2 weeks, they needed it in 3 weeks. So some of the pressure that happens is due to the fact that they are releasing print books and audiobooks at the same time. And because the print book is still being edited, we can't say the words until you have the words in front of us. So that becomes the challenge. That's been a major production change. We have gotten better at it. And you do something every day and you get better at it. But it's still pretty much, you read the book and then 2 to 3 hours spent in the studio for every finished hour that you achieve. Sometimes more, if it's not a good fit with you syntactically. So. And
then the other really big sort of technical shift was we went from galley pages to PDFs that were emailed to us, and that we have a program, we use Goodreader on our iPads. And so now there's no more stacks of paper. It's just we use these PDFs that we can can read on our iPads, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
No more trees.
Yep. Just
Nice.
Yeah, they had me scan those pages from Eye of the World and send it to them so that they would have it. So.
So I think there was a lot of moist eyes in the room as we were listening to you read. And I'd love to know if there was any part which you found emotional when you were reading it, or something that was difficult, or alternatively just your favorite bit. I mean, there's 13 books to pull from.
As an actor and as a narrator, you have to find a way to fall in love with whatever you're doing. Whatever character you're playing, whatever book you're reading, you have to find a way to love it. That's your job. That's the work. Sometimes that's an easy thing to do. I mean, because it's like, oh my God, I love this book. I love this book. This was really hard. And so, and also realize that every author, that book is their baby.
Yeah.
And
don't kill the baby.
Right. And the responsibility you feel as a narrator, and I know that we share this feeling. There was a time when they used to do multiple versions, like there might be 3 or 4 versions, different narrators would do the same work. Now it's pretty much one narrator or one narration group per book. And so that is the only way that book is going to get to some people. And the object was, the object, and we learned this a bit at the Library of Congress, you are trying to be as invisible as possible. Because you want everybody to hear the story, not Michael Kramer, not Kate Redding. You want them to hear the story. And so oftentimes it's like, when you're choosing character voices, it's like, does the book really merit that strong a character choice, or is it more plot driven? People don't care, it's like, if you call too much attention to a character voice, it's like, why? If that's not warranted. Now, there are other books where it's like, yes, it's demanded. He or she has given you, a description of this character. So there are books that, I got to do Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and that was my Bible going through college. 18 years after I read it, I got to do it. And it was also after the birth of my son. And it was this amazing journey for me to be able to do that.
He is notorious for breaking down in tears in the booth.
Yeah. But, part of it too is this genre in particular, I think, tries to tackle some really huge issues.
Say it.
And you have to go there.
Yeah.
You have to go there. It's not fair. And even though you may not understand it the way the author understands it, these are big things that people are encountering and dealing with. And even though in this story it's a Dark Lord or whatever, for them, that becomes a symbol for something completely different and something they deal with every day of their lives and fight with every day of their lives and feel the pain of every day of their lives. So to go to that place is almost incumbent on you as a narrator.
What are the bits that make you cry?
There's tons of things. If you remember Oathbringer, when
he doesn't remember Oathbringer.
I do remember Oathbringer, but when was it? What's his name? D starts with a D. Well, who?
Dalinar.
Yeah, when he is being stripped of his pain, that moment of confronting his addiction, and what it meant to him, and that's a huge one. But I mean, it happens all the time. A parent looking at a child looking at a parent. There are any number of times, if you really are paying attention to what the story is doing, it moves you. And you know, so it's easy to go there in that regard. I don't think that, to me, is not doesn't qualify you to. That's doing your work, you know.
For my part, I'm someone who always accessed anger growing up. That was the thing that would protect me and save me. And I had a lot of things to be very angry about. I also put myself in a lot of very risky situations, and anger often got me out of them. And so the anger in a book is like second skin. I know anger. I'm not afraid to be angry. I understand the dimensions of anger. The thing that kills me, and I think you saw it when I read Maureen's speech, is, and I will use the phrase, rise to the occasion. There's something, yeah, I'm gonna cry now. There's something so powerful about rising to the occasion and fighting for the force of good. And the fantasy genre and Wheel of Time in particular, so finely calibrated. They understand the power of that feeling. That you can feel alone and you can feel hopeless and you can feel like the world is shit and there's nothing I can do about it, and I may as well just remove myself. And then someone like Moraine or Henry V, through history, there have been these leaders who show up and go, we can do this. We can protect our land. We can create the world we want to live in. Let's all pull together. That is probably the thing that most slays me. That's probably the most often when I have like tears running, is in those moments where it's like, come on!
Donald E. West, I love humor. And Donald E. Westlake, I got to do a whole bunch of it, and a lot of it is now gone. They've reissued it under, I think they lost the copyright to it, so they had to re-record it. But there's still one out there, and it's my absolute favorite, which is Bad News. Just because the characters are so clear, they're so much fun. Oh my God. There are sentences in that book that took 15 minutes to do because I couldn't get through them. I was laughing. The thing, it's like to try to find as much humor, and you saw it here in the opening paragraph, because when a series is 400 and some hours long, it can't just be one thing. He's got everything in here, and we embrace that because, my God, it makes all of the other things stand out even more.
It's my turn.
Yes, it's your turn.
Hello. It's in.
Step forward a little bit more.
Sorry. Honor to speak to both of you. I am one of those people you mentioned in the previous answer. I'm blind, fan of the series, and so my only exposure to Wheel of Time has been through the audiobooks and your narration. And just basically going back to the question you just answered, I was curious, when you work together, when you collaborate, how do you come up with the characterization? Because they seem similar between both of you when the characters come up in different point of views. They seem similar. How do you collaborate with each other? Did the author give you input on the characterization or pronunciations or things?
We started recording the series over 25 years ago. And at the very beginning, we got almost no direction. We were basically told, read the books, make the decisions, you're good to go. And when it comes to the characterization, what's interesting is that I think that Michael and I respond in a very similar way to the writing. And so I would have a character, and then I would go check, did you have that character already? What does he sound like? And Michael would tell me, oh, yeah, I did have him, and this is the voice I gave him. And I'm like, good, they're really similar. So a lot of it is really based on, is it in the writing? Is it in the description? Is it in the way the character speaks? Is it there? And then do we have the sort of good fortune to both respond in the same way? And then there were some voices that I will never forget Michael coming up into the kitchen from the basement and saying, oh, I have a new character. His name is Loyal, and he sounds like this. That is like so cruel. There is no way I can do that voice. And I have not only him, but I have his mother too. But for the most part, and there are like plenty of mistakes that were made along the way in terms of pronunciations. I think it's only understandable for a series that large that there would be things that slip through the cracks. And for the most part, we sort of part is instinctive, and then part was strategic. We have a binder, loose leaf binder, about 2 inches thick, with the thousands of names and the way we pronounce them.
That was one of the first things. If you look at the Eye of the World, there's a little glossary in the back. And it has maybe 50, 60 terms, names, whatever in it. And rapidly, about chapter 4, I was running into names that were not in the book. And again, as I said, we started in the age when the phone had to be connected to the wall. And it was hugely expensive. And we didn't have email. We didn't have texts where we could say, how do you want it, like we do now? And the one phone call we made to Robert Jordan saying, how do you want us to go forward with this? Because he'd been given the first, I think, 5 books of the series, which were 5,000 pages or something like that. And I'm on page like 90, and I'm going, I've got 25 words already, and that doesn't even begin to touch anything. And he said, just trust yourself, and basically gave us carte blanche in terms of how to pronounce names. We basically tried to use the phoneticism that he had in the glossary in terms of our approach, in terms of a new character, new name, no reference to it. And yes, there were several characters that are named that we didn't get right, but partly because it's like, well, they're not listed separately, so we didn't even know that they existed. But that was the last phone call we had from him. And from what I understand, when he was, as he was writing the succeeding books, he would listen to the audiobook to basically, I think, put the story back into his mind in terms of where he wanted to go. Speaking of which, little promo, there is a lost, and I'm going to say lost, Robert Jordan book called The Warrior of the Altai, which is being released, I believe, October either 8th or 20th. It's really, really good. You can't. This get published, and it's not part of the Wheel of Time, but you can see all of the kind of stuff that he does, and it's typical Robert Jordan. He's really, you feel like you're encountering. This is his first novel, so you're encountering him, and you feel like, oh my God, he's at the height of his power, and he's just starting. So
just to put that out there, that it's there. And if you're looking for another kind of Robert Jordan fix, this will be a little bit different, but it's good.
Can I also ask you, do you use the Library of Congress Talking Books program?
I am from Canada, but I use something similar from there.
And there's no correlation between the two countries' systems.
I have borrowed books that come from America, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome.
I've heard your narration on things other than Wheel of Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I'm going to be the person that asks this question. I'm not going to ask you about the TV show and if you're involved, but if you had a fantasy involvement in the TV show, like a character or just any part of involvement, what would you want to do with the TV show?
Oh my God, that would be... I think I would want to be Varen.
So much. She's one of our universally favorite characters.
She's great. And I'm an obsessive researcher, so it wouldn't be a stretch.
So you're definitely a brown Aja then.
Yes.
Probably Tom Marilyn.
He's a goofball.
Yeah. And/or
How do you look at a mustache?
very, well, I would love to do like Loyal's, the voice of Loyal, just because that would be so much fun. I mean, I loved Loyal's character. I remember when I encountered that. Okay, new character, and this is his voice. Wow. And he has a 3-page monologue, so this is not something you can just kind of, oh my God. But the other character I really like is Basil Gill, so,
Yes! Gentleman and a scholar, Basil Gill.
Great, thank you.
What about you?
Yeah.
Me, I'm a tall, blue-eyed redhead, so I would definitely play an Aiel. Any Aiel would do. I dressed up as a wise one last night, and I actually did a birthing ceremony.
So I just wanted to double check. We had said that we wanted to do for an hour, and we are past time. We have a couple more people with questions. Are you okay sticking around, or do you want to end it, or?
Time is a construct.
Okay, sure, let's go for it. So, yeah.
Hey, my name's Josh. So y'all have hit it on this a little bit, but I'm really interested in the sort of meta side of like, what does a day in the studio actually look like, as far as, and are you're making these decisions, but how much do you prepare before you go in? What does it look like, making mistakes, and how is that edited out? Is it done in real time? Is it done in post, or what does that look like?
So normally, for the average book, we read it once through, and then we start recording it. We use Pro Tools. We have Mac Minis, and we use Pro Tools. And so we have a software program. So you open up a new session for the book, and you have this many tracks, and you start at the beginning. If you make a mistake, we have a keyboard in the booth. The Mini is outside because of the fan noise. So we are engineering ourselves using keyboard shortcuts. So if I'm in the middle of a track and I make a mistake, I just rewind, play back, hit record when I get to the sentence I screwed up, keep going. And then there's a soft process of you get to the end, you create fades to kind of smoosh your edit noises, then you consolidate, and that's your wave file, and that gets sent off.
And y'all do all of that yourselves?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't recommend that necessarily as a way to start, just because it's pretty hard to do. We've been doing it. We've been narrating for Kate's been narrating for almost over 30 years, and I'm just slightly less than that. A couple of things.
normally it's your concentration that goes first. So one of the most important things you can do is get a great night's sleep the night before. It's not your voice that will go, it's your concentration. Think of it to a certain degree as if you are a concert musician of some kind, because the book is the score and you're interpreting it. So you're looking at all those notes and you're making decisions in terms of dynamics and all those choices. And that takes a lot of concentration. And then, so that usually wears out before anything else wears out. And then, there are narration styles. There are hundreds, thousands, probably a narration style for every narrator out there. Some people only have one voice that they use, but they know how to tell a story. Other people create lots of character voices because that's their forte. I again, to use a musical metaphor, it's very much like my instrument has 6 different instruments in it. I've got a bass, I've got a cello, I've got a violin, I got a piccolo, and I got a drum. So how can I arrange this group of notes to fit so that those instruments can tell that story? Other people only have a French horn, but you've seen soloists, like, okay, they just told that whole story, even though you're used to hearing it with a full orchestra or whatever. And that's so those are the decisions you have to make. And you have about, some people can knock out 3-4 hours of finished work a day. I can't. And in terms of making mistakes, that's the first rule. That's the first thing I would say to anybody is, it's not a function of saying all the words correctly. That's almost the last consideration in terms of telling the story. So you cannot be afraid of making a mistake. This one can go pages without making a mistake. I usually crash and burn about, on an average page, probably 3 times a paragraph. Sometimes it feels like I'm going phrase to phrase. I just cannot get it the way I want. And sometimes you're like, yeah, I said all the words correctly, and I totally missed the sense of the sentence. So let's just get rid of that, throw it away. And you can't, you have to, that's part of, that has to be like, that's looking at the sculpture going, I carved all the lines and it looks like a piece of clay. Not so.
There is something that I'm wondering if there's a microphone in front of the speaker, because I think we're getting a little bit of reverb. So maybe they can be shifted away from the speakers. There is something that's quite similar to athletics about this. I think there's a mind-body connection where your mind is strategizing, but your body is fully involved. And there is if we go away for a week, we usually go visit Michael's family in Minnesota for a week in August. When we get back, I get back in the booth, I'm out of breath. Because I haven't been doing it every day, I no longer have the stamina. And it takes a couple days to kind of reset that stamina, resilience, ability to keep going without making mistakes. Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask a question about. I was actually going to ask another question about vocal health, if that's okay. Like, is there particular things that you do? Because I know that speaking is like one of the worst things you can do for your voice. I teach singing and stuff, so it's all like, what does that look like as far as someone who speaks for a living?
So he's going to go on and on about this. I'm just going to say very briefly, from my point of view, it is all about intention. If I understand the intention of the story, I understand the intention of the character, then it is effortless. And my voice does not tire. Because I'm connected to the reason why, the need, the urgency, why this word? Why this phrase? And that's a kind of, that's almost more of a spiritual connection than a technical connection. But if I don't understand the why, I stumble and fall and make mistakes and the voices sound flat and I can't get going. If I understand the reason, then all the channels are clear. There's no blockage.
Yeah, I mean, I think very much what you would recommend to a singer is what I would say for vocal health in terms of rest. I drink tons of coffee. Most people can't do that because it dries out their vocal cords. It really depends on your physical body. There are people who can't really eat a big meal because all of a sudden their stomach is gurgling. But vocally, what usually gets me is I'll be playing around with a character and throwing the tension into a certain part of the mechanism that's warping what would normally be, it's not a straight narration, it's character narration that's throwing it off. Sleep, and then, if I'm doing multiple hours, it's like stop the coffee and switch over to tea. Hydrate. Actually, also stand up, walk around, take your glasses off, and look far into the distance, because your eyes, after a while, it's like looking at any screen. You need to refocus your eyes so that you're maintaining all that kind of health stuff. But vocally, it's just pretty much the same as your singing voice. It's not opera, so you don't have to worry in that regard, and you're not going to be pushing it in the way an opera singer would. But if you spend 6 hours talking in the studio, that's a hefty bit. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned briefly that Loyal is one of your favorite characters. I was wondering if you could go into it a little bit more, and also with what both of your favorite characters are to read and why. I'd really, yeah.
Well, Loyal. And this is part of the I think the wonderful process a writer, the narrator writer, kind of come. They put clues into the text in terms of how they want it to sound, and there are, especially in this genre, they're making demands on you vocally that are not normal, because you've created something outside of what is quote unquote natural. And so you just have to embrace that and attack it. And Loyal was just so much fun because he was such an innocent. So there's a whole sense of humor that he has. I mean, who's the Spren who's with, and she's one of my favorite too, just because it's again this kind of innocence thing that's going on. And then there's some great characters that you just love. I mean, Andy Kelp in Bad News, which by Donnelly Westlake.
They want to hear about Wheel of Time characters.
A Wheel of Time, you had things like Tom, where you could just, it's like, okay, open it up and make it as round and pure as you can. Lan, it's like find that deep, no nonsense. I don't have time to spend any energy on what I say. It's going to just cut this way. Those are the things that I'm thinking about as I'm going into those voices.
But I'm just wondering, what are your favorites to just you look forward to reading this character? Like when it's a chapter comes up and it's your favorite character's chapter, what is that? Who is that for you? You went into it a little bit. But no, I want both. I would love to hear. Yeah.
I tend not to play favorites quite as much, and I end up there are all these different reasons why I love all these different characters, and it's not just about I love playing the powerful characters, right? Because you want to feel that you are this powerful person, and when you voice a character, you are that character, and so you're like, good, I can blow up the world, and I'm good. But I also really, really love the weak and broken characters, because that's a safe place to explore my own being weak and broken. You know, you can dig into a damaged character safely because it's not you. I mean, you get to explore who you are as that character, but it's a character. So then you get to leave your weakness and brokenness with that character, and you get to kind of honor the character and pay tribute to the character and say, thank you. Thank you for being the weak and broken part of myself, and I'm going to leave you here in this book. I'm not going to bring you with me. So, you know, I cannot tell you one favorite. Obviously, I enjoyed voicing Varen. I just thought, you know, just this kind of perfect. But there are also like, I really loved doing the murder rolls because I did them on an inhale. So when I talked in the murder roll, I was breathing in
Thank you.
Yeah, can we try and...
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I host a different Wheel of Time podcast, and one of my listeners asked me to tell you that, Michael, they really like the way that you say Drakkar. They wanted me to pass that along, so I did.
All right.
I'm trying to be a writer myself, and I've been trying to find as much as I can about how the sausage is made, so I'm wondering if you have advice for someone trying to be a storyteller of my own epic fantasy.
Congratulations. That's a wonderful thing to be doing. So well done. I mean, I have so much respect for fantasy writers because I think they have a huge canvas, and it really is all about the details. So you have this big overarching story, and every little detail needs to fit and support that overarching story. So I feel like it's you go to like a twofold thing that you're doing. One is you're telling a really big, sort of epic, monolithic story, and they're always basically about the fight between good and evil. Right? So from a general point of view, most fantasy books follow that same arc. And then it's all about the details. It's all about these little characters and what do they each do and what are their relationships with each other. I know that for the Wheel of Time series, it was really helpful to be able to track the different points of view. So that's a tool that is often used in the fantasy genre, where you have multiple storylines, you switch over and it seats you in a particular character because for this whole chapter, you're seeing the story from their point of view. So that's helpful. So I think it's a combination of like inspiration and construction. So like spirit and strategy. Do you have anything to add?
The tension is always, to me, in the world of fantasy and science fiction, is the world building, and how much work do you have to do as an author in the world building, and then really paying close attention to what that does. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, world building is a bit boring in terms of, as a reader, it's kind of like, if I'm playing a game and I have to read 25 pages of rules before I can actually even put the first piece on the board, that's hard. I want to jump into the game and then kind of get the rules, and that's the mix is always about that. How do you do the world building, and how much is the world building? What's the word?
Essential.
Well, yeah, essential and/or. What I find interesting about the genre is it's trying to strip away the way we look at things so that we're looking at it from a new point of view without all the baggage that that this does or that does. And so we can see relationships from without totally, it's a bit like, look at my coat, not at the color red of my coat, but my coat and how it's different. But if everybody's caught up and so you've stripped away color or whatever in your storytelling, so that you actually see the issue from a different point of view and in a different way. And that's the power of the genre, and it's also the difficult thing to communicate that. The big thing is they're always human stories.
Yeah.
And
read.
Yeah.
Just read as much as you can.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Because yeah.
And good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That went over what we were expecting. So I think we've all asked the questions that we want to ask. We are going to let you guys go, feed these guys some lunch, and then I have an Age of Legends D&D game that I have to run. So thank you very much. Thank you so much. We will keep communicating. Maybe eventually someday we can get you guys out here and do this in person and let you experience the nerdery that is this podcast.
Can't wait.
All right.